Back with some breaking news coming in. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the DGCA, has amended the civil aviation requirement, Section 3, Series M, Part 1. Those are the technical details coming in of carriage by air persons with disability or persons with reduced mobility to improve the accessibility of boarding and flying for disabled people. Now, the proposed amendment has been carried out given a certain para of the same regulation, which is as follows and says, and I quote, airlines shall not refuse carriage of any persons on the basis of disability and or reduced mobility. However, in case an airline perceives that the health of such a passenger may deteriorate in flight, the said passenger will have to be examined by a doctor in person who shall, in his or her opinion, categorically state the medical condition and whether the passenger is fit to fly or not. Madhav is joining us with more details. Madhav, this kind of an amendment was proposed in the first place when a specially abled child was not allowed to board an Indigo flight. Given that this issue was raked up, what more can you tell us about the amendment that has been passed?
Well, yes, and at that time as well, in fact, the DGCA found that the private airline in question had not done enough due diligence or shown sensitivity to the concerns of that particular disabled passenger or the child, as you rightly mentioned. And therefore, the DGCA at that time had also said that they would be amending the rules. In this case, they are called the civil aviation requirements, which is for the carriage by air of persons with disability or with reduced mobility to improve the accessibility of boarding and flying for disabled people. Now, what this has specifically mentioned is that the airline shall not refuse carriage of any person on the basis of disability and or reduced mobility. However, in case an airline perceives that the health of such a person may deteriorate in flight, the said passenger will have to be examined by a doctor in person who shall, in his or her opinion, categorically state the medical condition and whether the passenger is fit to fly or not. After obtaining this medical opinion, then the airline shall take an appropriate decision on the carriage of such a passenger. In case of refusal of carriage by the airline, it shall inform the passenger in writing with the reasons therein immediately. So very, very important that the airline will have to ensure that there is medical advice of a doctor that is taken, and on the basis of that medical advice only can the airline take a decision on the same, and they will also have to give the reasons in writing. So very, very big step to ensure that, and this is a problem that has not just occurred for the first time. There has been a history to this particular issue, that several people with certain kinds of disabilities have complained about airlines being insensitive to their concerns. Now, when it comes to the entire issue of boarding, if the boarding is being denied, there will now be a procedure which all airlines will have to necessarily follow, and that's why it is a huge step, particularly as far as travel and transport of by air of persons with disability or restricted mobility is concerned.
Right. Madhav, this is a big change because the existing rules don't really explicitly state that disability will not be a reason for denying passengers boarding. Though if an airline refuses to allow a passenger, they need to give a reason in writing.
Well, it would be fair to say that this was a grey area in the past. There was no specific code which had to be followed by airlines as far as the passengers with disability or reduced mobility is concerned. In that sense, it certainly is a big step by the DGCA that has been taken and has been announced now. One will have to see, of course, what the airlines' response is to this. Of course, we expect that the airlines will follow the DGCA's orders as is the regulator in the civil aviation sector. But yes, as you rightly put it, this was a gap as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, and that gap the DGCA says has now been filled with this one particular requirement of necessarily taking a doctor's advice, taking medical advice on the condition of that passenger, and only if the doctor goes ahead and gives the advice that the passenger is not fit to fly or the health condition could deteriorate in flight, only under such circumstances will an airline now be able to go ahead and deny them boarding. So it's a very, very important step. It is on the basis of sound medical advice that an airline can go ahead and do this, because earlier it would just be the airline staff who would randomly decide if a person can fly or not. So what gives them the right to do so is a question that had been put out by several activists as well as those who have suffered at the hands of similar treatment by different airlines in the past. Now the DGCA hopes with this new regulation kicking in that this will be a thing of the past.
So it's a massive reform in the airline sector and certainly a step taken in the direction to empower the disabled, because Madhav, several instances in the past have revealed how, there is unruly behavior that has often been meted out to those who have approached the airlines to board the plane. But that's the kind of behavior that was meted out to them, and given that, these changes have been brought in.
We have
Well, absolutely. There has been a history.
Madhav, apologies. Do stay on with us. We have Deepa Malik joining us over the phone line. A very, very big move that has been taken by the DGCA, and this is after a passenger was denied entry in the Indigo Airlines. All right. We'll go back to that. Madhav, please do continue.
Well, yes, as you rightly said, there is a history to this. There have been several instances, not on only one airline. Of course, the recent episode was on Indigo, as you rightly mentioned, but there have been instances in the past as well where, in fact, those with disabilities have, in fact, claimed that they were unfairly either denied boarding or not allowed on board. And there are people with different kinds of disabilities as well, not just those who have restricted mobility, but all other sorts of disabilities. Now, if there is a reason for them to be denied boarding on sound medical grounds only, will that happen? Unless, of course, and this also applies to those who may be unwell. If the airline feels that a person is not in the best of health, even then, this is the protocol that is going to be followed. So it's not going to be on the random basis of what airline staff may perceive as a person who's unfit for flying, but it will be on the basis of sound medical advice, and that step now being taken by the DGCA to ensure that nobody is denied boarding on such flimsy grounds.
All right. Appreciate you joining us with all those details. Thank you, Madhav.